There are moments in life that arrive without warning. Not with thunder, not with fire, but with a single, quiet collision that rearranges everything you thought you were. She was the daughter of empire, born into rooms where chandeliers burned like small suns and men bowed before her father's name. He was the son of the forest, forged in silence and soil, with hands that knew how to hold both danger and tenderness. Neither one was looking. And yet, the moment their eyes met across that rain-washed mountain road, something ancient and inevitable exhaled, as if the world had been holding its breath for exactly this. If this story already has your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Now let it begin. The Dolomites were not Ariana Greco's idea of a retreat. They were her father's idea of a punishment dressed in silk. Send the rebellious daughter to oversee the failing vineyard acquisition in northern Italy, far from the boardrooms of Milan, far from the scandal she'd refused to let him bury. She arrived in a black SUV that was too polished for the gravel roads, wearing heels that had no business near pine needles, and carrying the particular brand of exhaustion that only comes from fighting people who love you wrong. The vineyard sat at the foot of a ridge that dissolved into forest. She stepped out into cool air that smelled of wet earth and cedar and something she had no word for, something that felt disturbingly like relief. That was when she heard the dog. It came barreling from the tree-line, a massive, silver-coated hunting hound, and stopped dead 3 feet from her, trembling with restrained energy, its amber eyes fixed on her face. Ariana did not move. She had been trained not to show fear in rooms full of wolves. She simply held its gaze. Asterisk ombra. Asterisk. One word. Low, unhurried, absolute. The dog sat instantly. Ariana looked up. He was standing at the edge of the tree line, one hand resting on the bark of a birch as though the forest belonged to him. And from the way he held himself, it clearly did. Tall, dark-haired, wearing worn field clothes that fit the landscape better than they fit any occasion she'd ever attended. His face was angular and still, the kind of face that had learned to give nothing away. But his eyes, dark as good espresso, just as dangerous, moved over her once, and she felt it like a change in weather. "You're on private land," he said. Not rude. Not warm. Simply factual. "So are you," she replied. Asterisk, I own it. Asterisk. A beat. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but its shadow. Asterisk, not yet, you don't. Asterisk. She didn't know then that his name was Don Raphael Santini, that his family had worked and managed that ridge for 3 generations, that the land had been promised to his father before her father's lawyers had quietly rewritten the terms of the acquisition. She didn't know any of that. She only knew that something in her chest had tightened, and she absolutely could not allow that. She learned his name from the vineyard's estate manager that evening, over a dinner she barely touched. Asterisk Raphael Santini, son of the old gamekeeper, runs the hunting grounds and the upper trails. Keeps to himself. Knows every inch of this mountain. Asterisk the manager said it the way people describe landscape, matter-of-factly, as though Raphael were simply part of the terrain. Ariana said nothing. She poured more wine and looked out the window at the ridge, where the last light was going amber and slow. Days passed. She worked. She reviewed contracts and walked the vineyard rows and took calls from her father's lawyers, who used words like leverage and expedient while she watched the mountain. She told herself she was not watching for him. She saw him twice more that first week. Once from the terrace at dawn, a dark figure moving along the ridge with the dog at his heel, unhurried and quiet. Once at the local market in the village, where he was buying coffee and speaking in low Italian to an elderly woman who clutched his arm with both hands like he was something precious. He did not look up, or he chose not to show that he had. That distinction, she realized, mattered enormously with a man like him. The third encounter was not accidental. She had taken the East Trail alone. The estate manager had warned her it was rough, which was exactly why she'd chosen it. She needed something to push against. She was 2 kilometers in when the path split into unmarked forks and the fog rolled in fast off the ridge, the way mountain fog does, sudden and complete and indifferent to her schedule. She stopped, turned in a slow circle. The trees had become identical. Asterisk, the left fork leads back to the vineyard. Asterisk. Raphael Santini stepped from between 2 pines as though he'd been there all along, which she suspected he had. He was carrying nothing, his hands loose at his sides, Ombra a gray ghost behind him. Asterisk, were you following me? Asterisk, she asked. I was ahead of you, he said. Asterisk, there's a difference. Asterisk. She studied him. He did not fidget under scrutiny. Most men did. Asterisk why? Asterisk. He glanced at the fog, then back at her, as if the answer should have been obvious. Asterisk, because you took the East Trail alone and you don't know this mountain. Asterisk. No performance in it. No angling for gratitude. She felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. The particular discomfort of being genuinely looked after, rather than managed. I don't need protecting, she said, because it was the thing she always said. Raphael Santini looked at her for a moment. Really looked at her, the way the forest looks patient, and said, asterisk, I know. Asterisk, then he turned and walked the left fork, and Amber glanced back at her once before following. Ariana stood in the fog for 3 full seconds before she followed too. It became a quiet ritual neither of them named. She walked the trails. He was simply there, occasionally visible, mostly not, but always somehow present in the way the mountain was present. Certain, steady, not asking anything. He began leaving small things at the estate gate. A bunch of wild herbs tied with grass. A hand-drawn map of the safe trails. Once, a jar of honey from the ridge bees with no note, no name, as though it had simply appeared by natural law. She kept all of it. She would not let herself examine why. The dinner party was her father's doing, of course. Marco Greco arrived from Milan on a Friday with 6 guests, 2 lawyers, and Alessandro Ferrara, handsome, polished, the heir to a rival estate and her father's preferred solution to the problem of Ariana's independence. Alessandro was the kind of man who made rooms feel smaller and women feel seen in a way that was more about him than about them. He kissed her cheek at the door, held her hand a breath too long, and spent the evening finding reasons to occupy her orbit. She was perfectly pleasant to him. She had been trained for this too. Raphael was there because the estate manager had invited the Santini family out of long courtesy, a tradition predating her father's ownership. He sat at the far end of the table, clean but unchanged, wearing the same composed stillness he wore in the forest. He said little. He watched everything. And when Alessandro leaned close to Ariana at the table, fingertips brushing her shoulder as he refilled her wine, Ariana felt, rather than saw, Raphael's gaze shift. She looked up. Their eyes met across the candlelit table, and the dinner party seemed to recede, the voices going soft and distant, until there was only that steady, dark attention and the strange, unwelcome warmth it produced in her sternum. Alessandro said her name. She looked away. Later, finding herself alone on the terrace, she heard the door behind her. She knew before she turned. He's not right for you, Raphael said quietly. She turned, arms crossing. Asterisk, you don't know what I need. Asterisk. No, he said. He was closer than she expected. Close enough that she could see the firelight from the windows catching the angles of his face. Asterisk, but I know what you don't need. And it's someone who looks at you like a trophy he's already decided to take. Asterisk. The silence stretched. The valley below was full of dark, and the sound of crickets, and the faint noise of the dinner party still turning without them. Asterisk. And how do you look at me? Asterisk, she asked. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. Raphael held her gaze for one long, unhurried moment. Like something I would never take, he said. Asterisk, only ever wait for. Asterisk. He went back inside before she could answer. She stood on the terrace for a long time, her heart misbehaving terribly. The valley spread out below her like an accusation. She told herself she felt nothing. She told herself this with the particular conviction of someone who feels everything. And 2 days later, when her father sat across from her in the estate's cold study and told her that the acquisition required one final condition. The Santini family's eviction from the ridge land they had managed for 30 years. She understood, with a clarity that felt like falling, that she had already chosen a side. She just hadn't told Raphael yet. She found him at dawn on the upper ridge. He was alone, ombre somewhere in the trees, the valley still filling with morning light below. He was sitting on a flat stone at the cliff's edge, a thermos of coffee between his hands, looking at nothing in particular with the easy patience of someone who had spent a lifetime learning to be still. Ariana stood at the edge of the clearing for a moment, watching him, and felt the particular ache of knowing what she had to say. She said it plainly. She was her father's daughter in that, at least, she did not dress hard things in soft words. She told him about the eviction clause. The timeline. The lawyers. She watched his face as she spoke. Watched the stillness that she'd come to understand was not coldness but control, and watched something move through it now, brief and deep as a current beneath ice. When she finished, a long silence held the ridge. Did you know, he said finally, without turning, asterisk, when you first came here? Asterisk. No, she said. Asterisk, I found out 2 days ago. Asterisk. Asterisk, and your father? He knew when he sent you. Asterisk. She didn't answer. That was answer enough. Raphael stood. He turned to face her, and for the first time she saw something raw in him. Not anger, but something older than anger, something that looked like grief wearing the face of a proud man. My father built the first fence on that ridge, he said quietly. Asterisk, my mother planted the rosemary by the gate. My brother is buried in the soil at the eastern boundary. Asterisk. Ariana felt the words like pressure in her chest. Then they send you, he said. Not accusatory. More like he was working it out. Asterisk. And they hoped I would be too distracted to fight it. Asterisk. Raphael. Asterisk, was that the plan? Asterisk, he asked. And the way he said it, quiet, direct, without cruelty, was somehow worse than fury. That was his plan, she said. Asterisk, not mine. Asterisk, her voice held. Barely. Asterisk. I'm here telling you because it is not what I want. I won't sign the eviction clause. I will fight it. Asterisk. He looked at her for a long, measuring moment. That will cost you, he said. Asterisk, with your father. Asterisk. I know, she said. The cost arrived faster than she expected. Her father pulled the acquisition funding within 48 hours. He called it a business decision in the press. He called it something else to her on the phone, in the cold vocabulary that powerful men use when the women they love fail to be convenient. She listened. She did not yield. When the call ended, she sat in the estate kitchen alone and pressed both hands flat on the old oak table until the shaking stopped. Raphael appeared at the kitchen door 20 minutes later with 2 cups of coffee and said nothing. And she was grateful, in a way she didn't know how to express, that he understood when silence was the kinder thing. He set a cup before her and sat across the table. Ombre curled under his chair. The morning light came through the old windows in long, warm diagonals, and Ariana looked at this man. This impossible, steady, infuriating man, and felt something shift in her chest that she knew she could no longer afford to call nothing. I'm afraid, she said. She hadn't planned to say it. Raphael wrapped both hands around his cup. He didn't look surprised. Asterisk, of your father? Asterisk. Of depending on someone, she said. Asterisk, and having them leave. Asterisk. He was quiet for a moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, he reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. Just that. No words performing around it. His hand over hers, warm and certain, on the old oak table in the morning light. I don't leave, he said. Asterisk, ask the mountain. Asterisk. The danger came from the direction she least expected. Not from her father, but from Alessandro Ferrara, who was considerably less polished beneath the surface than above it. He had been building a case against the Santini family for years, manufacturing land disputes, lobbying for permits that would cut off ridge access. When Ariana refused the eviction clause, Alessandro moved differently. He went to the press with a fabricated story. That she had compromised the acquisition through a personal entanglement, that the deal's collapse was her negligence, her misconduct. Her name appeared in the financial press attached to words like reckless and unstable. Her phone burned with calls. The board of her father's company circled like weather. And then, on a Tuesday morning, 2 men she had never seen arrived at the estate and stood outside the gate looking up at the house with the particular patience of people who are waiting for a permission they've already decided they don't need. Raphael was at the gate before the estate manager had even called her. She watched from the upper window as he spoke with them, unhurried, his posture neither threatening nor yielding, Ombre motionless at his side. Whatever was said, the men left within 4 minutes. He watched them down the road until they were gone before he turned back to the house. Later, she found him in the east courtyard. Asterisk, who were they? Asterisk. Ferrara's people, Raphael said. Asterisk, how did you know they'd come? Asterisk. He looked at her with that calm she had once mistaken for indifference and now understood was its opposite, an enormous, controlled attention. Because I've been watching since the dinner party, he said. Asterisk. Since the moment he touched your shoulder and you didn't want him to but smiled anyway. Asterisk. The courtyard was very quiet. Raphael, she said carefully. Asterisk, what did you do? Asterisk. The corner of his mouth moved. Asterisk, I made some calls. I know people who know people. Ferrara's land records go back 20 years. Asterisk, a pause. Asterisk, they don't hold up well under scrutiny. Asterisk. Her breath came out slowly. Asterisk, you could have lost the ridge doing this. If it came back to you. Asterisk. Yes, he said. Quiet. Absolutely steady. Asterisk, I know. Asterisk. He had been willing to risk the one thing she'd been fighting for her. She looked at him and finally stopped arguing with what she felt. Ferrara's land dispute collapsed under legal challenge within 2 weeks. The fabricated press story unraveled. Her father, faced with the exposure of the acquisition's bad faith clauses in a filing that Raphael's lawyer had prepared with extraordinary precision, made the calculation that cutting his losses was cleaner than continuing the fight. The eviction clause was struck. The ridge remained with the Santinis. The vineyard contract was restructured, fairly, with Ariana's signature rather than her father's. It was not reconciliation with her father. That was a longer road, maybe permanent distance, and she had made her peace with that. What it was her own name attached to her own choices standing up. She stood on the ridge the evening after the final signing, watching the sun drop behind the Dolomites in long ribbons of copper and rose. Ambra found her first, as the dog always did, pressing a warm flank against her leg. She reached down and scratched behind the dog's ears and felt the particular fullness that comes after something hard is finally over. Raphael came to stand beside her, their shoulders nearly touching. The valley spread below them in the last light, every row of the vineyard visible from here, every trail she had walked over the past weeks. Asterisk, what happens now? Asterisk, she asked. He was quiet for a moment, that shaped, deliberate quiet she had learned to read. Then he turned to face her, and his expression was the most open she had ever seen it. The control still there, but something beneath it that had been waiting a long time to be spoken. I told you I would wait, he said. Asterisk, I'm still waiting. But I want you to know what I'm waiting for. Asterisk. Ariana turned to him fully. I love you, he said. Not performed. Not decorated. Just the words, placed between them with the same directness he gave everything. Asterisk. Not because you're Marco Greco's daughter or because you defied him for this ridge. Because I watched you stand alone in fog on a mountain you didn't know and refused to show fear. Because you kept the honey. Because you told me the truth when it cost you. Because, asterisk, he stopped. Something moved through his face. Asterisk, because the mountain was quieter before you came, and I don't want it quiet anymore. Asterisk. Ariana felt the old fear rise, the reflex, the armor, the careful inventory of all the ways this could end in loss. She felt it, and then she felt something stronger, something that had been growing in her since that first morning in the fog when she had followed him down the left fork and known, somewhere beneath her pride, that she had been waiting too. I kept the honey, she said, asterisk, because I keep the things that matter to me. Asterisk. She reached up and touched his face, one hand the side of his jaw, and watched the stillness in him soften into something unguarded and unashamed. His hand came up to cover hers, warm and certain. The sun finished setting. The first stars appeared over the ridge. He kissed her there, in the last of the light. Not hurried, not desperate, but with the deep patience of a man who had always known exactly what he was waiting for. She kissed him back with all the certainty she'd spent weeks denying. Below them, the vineyard glowed in the dusk. Months passed with the unhurried grace of good seasons. The vineyard's first harvest under the new contract came in heavier than projected. The old Santini knowledge of the ridge soil proving, as it always had, more valuable than any consultant's report. Ariana stayed. She did not plan it formally. She simply found that each reason to leave was smaller than each reason to remain, until remaining became the only thing that made sense. She and Raphael married in the chapel at the village's edge on a morning that smelled of rain and cedar and late roses, with the estate manager as witness and Ambra sitting in the front row with the particular dignity of a dog who understood his importance. It was small and unhurried and entirely theirs. 3 of her closest friends were there, and they told her afterward that they had never seen her look so entirely like herself. The following spring, the same spring the first vineyard bottles went to market, Ariana stood in the kitchen with the morning light coming through the old windows and told Raphael there would be someone new on the ridge before the year was out. He set down his cup. He crossed the kitchen and pulled her close, one hand cradling the back of her head, his face pressed into her hair, and she felt him breathe, a long, full, unguarded breath, as though something in him had finally, completely exhaled. The mountain, he murmured against her hair, asterisk, will be very good to them. Asterisk. Outside, Ambra barked once at something in the tree-line, a deer, probably, or the morning wind, and the ridge stood in its old, patient green, holding everything it had always held. The rosemary by the gate, the frost-marked boundary stones, the grave of a brother beneath the eastern soil, and now this. A woman who had come to take a mountain and had been claimed by it instead, and a man who had waited without demanding, loved without condition and proven, in the quiet and thorough language of action that some things do not leave. That love, when it is real, does not diminish the ground beneath you. It becomes it.